asked us to tell about some of the momentous things in
The highlights.
of our rural life. Thank you for that, and we'll proceed.
I'm Grammy, Betty Horton. We've been married 64 years.
I'm Pete Horton, and she's given me every haircut except the one on my wedding day, which is why I look like this. And I'm 7 years older than Betty. One of her friends fixed us up on a blind date, dated for 3 months, and decided to get married. Right from the very start, we've always tried to have an entrepreneurial slant to everything.
When we got through with one adventure career, we went on to the next, but we had to invent one. So the first career was ski lodge at Mount Snow and Haystack in Wilmington, Vermont, southern Vermont.
It was an old farmhouse that we had renovated and had been totally derelict. Well, this little 19-year-old girl that Pete found is going to come in and upset the whole business. She totally reshaped the business we had. We were a ski lodge. She came in and said, I'm not moving into a place like this if you're going to continue to have these average skier dudes running up and down the halls at night and so forth. The customers we've had that we've liked have been families. So we threw out our mailing list of 350 names, started over with only 7 people who would be welcome to come back. When the vacation council in town, which is like a booking service, found out about that, anybody that came along with kids, they told us about us. First year we were doing that, we did better than we did the previous year.
And not only that, we entertained the kids and had a day nursery, and we were having kids too, our own 2 sons.
So Betty had learned that all, I guess, in her career as being the best babysitter in her neighborhood. What was the deal with the family?
They did the walkover shoes, which were very, top of the line shoes, next to Dr. Spock. And Dr. Spock and I got to know each other a little bit on the dock when they went on their boat, and I said to Dr. Spock, am I doing okay? And he said, you're doing great. That was an adventure.
She brought that experience and talent and contacts to the lodge business. Tired of the ski area mentality, everything was let it all hang out.
There were drugs coming in with the young people, and they were jumping off our porch and doing dangerous
Well, the
things.
porch was like 2
We
stories
didn't
off
understand, what is this drug thing? So we said, well, we didn't want our 2 sons to be living in an environment of drugs. So we said, it's time to go. It was a very abnormal life for 2 young boys. They could see mom and dad doing pretty hard work.
And they could see all the other families. Dad became sort of a group leader among all the kids' activities and so forth.
So they got to see city kids who were very misbehaved and very spoiled, and they got to know what bad behavior was. And they were so good, by comparison.
I used to take off every Tuesday afternoon, tour around Vermont looking for when our next adventure would be. And found a great farmhouse west of St. Johnsbury. The next week I took Betty up there, and she cried. Apparently it was places
Didn't like it.
not to her liking. But next week I went up the west side of Vermont. Came up Route 30 into Cornwall and Middlebury. I thought, oh, this is so great. And I thought, this is where we belong. So she loved that too. And her mother lived in Bennington, so that was only 2 hours north of her mother.
Well, I grew up in Bennington.
Yeah.
Where my dad was a surgeon at the Bennington Hospital. It was a great place to grow up because I could go out my back door, jump over the brook with my little dog Penny, and I'd be in my 1-room schoolhouse, 8 grades. And when school was over, Penny and I jumped over the brook and came home, and I'm like, this is like out of Norman Rockwell, who was a friend of the family, by the way.
Because your father
My
operated
father operated on Norman Rockwell, and I went to school with his son, so we were friends.
So we bought a 120-acre farm 7 miles west of Middlebury, another derelict farmhouse.
Not livable.
So we needed a place to live, so we bought the cheapest house available in Middlebury at that time, which was right near the high school. The people who came up at that time and bought the second cheapest house became our very best friends. Suzanne and Artemis Ward. 2 kids, Jamie and Justin, were to become best friends with Ned and Dex. And Suzanne had been one of the rowdy guests at the Old Ark. She was on one of the names that we dropped from our mailing list. A committee got together in Middlebury to see about what they could do to improve things. It was a civic improvement committee. And they came up with a list of about 10 things that needed doing. So I picked Chamber of Commerce. So we went from about 12 members with dues of $5 a year. So we grew that to, what do you say?
500 members.
Marketing wise, we changed it to a county-wide, not the Middlebury Chamber, but the Addison County. We did that for how many years, you think? Maybe it was 9 years.
9 years, I think we did that.
One major thing was that the Chamber staged institutes for organization management in Delaware every year. I would go down for a week's course every summer to study organization development
For nonprofit.
for nonprofits.
And they teach you that you are the quiet voice in the background, keeping them on track with good bylaws. If you have 500 members, you have to be politically correct all the time, just like a preacher had to be. We didn't always please 500 people. And the garden club ladies, they were very important because they didn't want Middlebury to be over commercial or strip development. And we had to fight a Walmart out because nobody wanted a Walmart.
But we brought in Kraft cheese.
We felt so good about that because the dairy folks were very happy to have their milk go to Kraft cheese.
Another major thing was as we started a series called Legislative Breakfast. As executive of the chamber, my job was to greet everybody, welcome everybody, and then shut up and let them do the talking.
We started with a handful, like 12 people, and we grew to 150 every Monday. And it was amazing because the public did all the talking and they wanted their legislators to be transparent.
So we had no idea what people were going to say. That was great. We would have 100% attendance from the county state representatives and senators. So we continued to run the Downtown Middlebury Business Bureau, but most importantly, we developed a brochure distribution system.
By being journalists and writers, we could put together a nice graphic and a nice brochure for promoting a restaurant or hotel. That was our niche for a while. And when we got ready to leave, our competitor wanted to buy it. This is valuable. We didn't know. I mean, it was all our effort and no investment. Well, we had our brochure rags.
We started writing a column. So for how many years? 22, 23 years?
22 years.
Every week I had to write a column about what I was thinking about. It was everything from the family dog to the president of the U.S. and whatever I wanted to. Posing as an average Vermonter in their opinion.
And then I wrote for a daily paper, the Rutland Herald. I wrote a weekly column on travel. And then I wrote for a year for the Vermont Magazine. And the weekly column, when you finish one, you got to think what you're going to do next. Oh,
Right.
We wrote for the Rutland Business Journal frequently.
Oh, then we got into Christmas trees. Now that was a real business. We're growing trees in pasture land. It kept us in farming. We had tried vegetables, that didn't work. We had tried firewood.
Maple syrup.
But the Christmas trees was good. That was a cash crop.
Well, people come to cut their own, and we had a big barn, and in the barn we had a Christmas tree and a train that the kids could see going around the Christmas tree, and we had hot chocolate and hot cider. I was always making a wreath, so that was a cash crop.
So we were doing that while we were doing the freelance writing and brochure distribution. I'd been involved in regional planning. Then there was something called the Travel Information Council. There was a state representative, Ted Reilly, who came up with this idea of getting rid of billboards and placing it with a system of state-owned and designed signs.
What year was this?
I would say in the 75, maybe.
The great thing about that, now that we live in Maine, is I can drive down the street 6 blocks and point to a map plaza and tell everybody that wouldn't be there if it weren't for me, because our Travel Information Council had 7 members. I was the swing vote. 3 of the members were the highway commissioner and other state people who didn't want to do this because it sounded too expensive.
Well, you had to buck the oil lobby. Most of the billboards were petroleum people. Petroleum industry was paying a lot of money and bribing people to get their billboards on the interstate. The time involved was incredible, so he was always off and doing this lobbying, really, and fighting the bureaucrats. So it was like a bureaucratic victory to have. Just think of that, taking down the billboards.
So you've told me 2 interesting stories about your interactions with some famous politicians, both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden.
Right.
Do you want to talk any reflections on those experiences or interactions?
I first met Bernie. I knew he was not a wealthy person. He didn't have a real source of income. I went over to the high school and met him. I said, we live right across the street. And he brushed me off.
You were inviting him to spend the night or something?
Yeah. Meanwhile, we'd had Kelton Miller sleep on our couch. He was a lieutenant governor.
Uh-huh.
He was lieutenant governor of the state. And we offered that to Bernie, and he just shrugged it off.
Well, he didn't like the Rutland Herald, so when you told him you wrote for the Rutland Herald, he didn't like that. I
thought, well, that's stupid if he thinks a reporter is going to have the same political opinion as the publisher. Years later, freelancing for the Rutland Herald, he was going to speak. This is 15 years later. And I went up there at 3 o'clock, and there wasn't a soul around. And then I see out in the parking lot, Bernie drives in. When I went out, met him halfway, introduced myself. He goes right on by me. So what do I have? A short sleeve shirt, some khaki pants, and my messy hair. But I'm old. And I really, this guy is really just as prejudiced as anyone else. Senator Biden's going to speak to the college. Herald will like that. I called him, hey, what do you? They're looking for like a 6-inch article, $15 in my pocket. Don't knock it. So the students were in there, and they were all men. Biden was going to get picked up at the airport in Burlington by a couple of volunteer students. And finally they come in, and he immediately takes his coat off, rolls his sleeves up, took some couch in the front, backed that to the stage, and he threw his coat and papers and sat on the arm of the chair and started talking to people. And I don't even remember what the issues were at this point.
Well, it was foreign affairs, for sure. The whole subject was foreign affairs.
Right. I had to get my paper phoned in by 10:30. We had no email on those days. So I needed a half an hour, and so I left the meeting at 10, picked up the name and telephone number of the head of that group. So I called him the next day and said, how'd you guys make out? He said, well, we went on to 1 o'clock. His plane was at 4 a.m. in Burlington. Well, I thought, what? He's not running for anything. There's nothing going on. The students in this such and such a political club wanted to, it's part of their education.
Picking his brain, for his.
So.
He was so dedicated.
Nobody knows about it from a little Rutland Herald article. It's not like he's getting brownie points for any, except the guys that were in that room. No women there.
Where did he find the energy to do all that? And then, so you had great admiration for him.
Well, I hope you all thanked me for my service in Korea.
I think the interesting part of that we tell is that at that particular year that you were there, they integrated, they had always separate races.
In the Army?
And somebody asked you, a professor at Middlebury
Oh, yeah.
asked you this.
He turns and looks down on me. Were you integrated? And, yeah, I took philosophy, and then I studied a little French. I got I flunked that. And, well, I mean, it's not a term that we ever used.
And so it was, but actually it was the first year that they were integrated. But it was so normal to them that it didn't seem like they didn't know it was the first year, that it was a big deal.
Military didn't say anything about it. There was nothing in the papers.
And who knew that they weren't? You know, it's like, really?
The blacks we had were all from the South. They had a tendency to hang together, but the bone part of that would just sit with them. I mean, you know, and we didn't know about being disintegrated.
I roomed with Lena Horne's daughter for several years, and we were best friends, and still are best friends. When I visited her home, there were all these Hollywood musicians and people that were very famous, and one was Billy Strayhorn, who was a collaborator with Duke Ellington, and together they wrote 400 pieces of music. Rhythm and blues was part of my life, and we grew up on rhythm and blues, Sam Cooke and so forth. What do you know? We come to Nashville, and half these musicians have played with all these famous people.